How's it going, guys? Will here, and today, as promised, I'm going to be doing the full tutorial on how to get cinematic footage using only your iPhone. No external hardware required, we're solely going to be using the iPhone camera, none of those fancy moment lenses, and other than some software which I'm going to recommend, this is completely free. Okay. Let's get into it. So the first thing that we need to consider when shooting video with an iPhone is the resolution. When you're shooting on an iPhone, it's pretty important to shoot in as high a resolution as you possibly can. So for, I think, most modern iPhones, that'll be 4K. I think the 6 only does 1080p, but pretty much any modern supported up-to-date iPhone is able to shoot 4K. So select 4K as an option in your settings, because when you're shooting on pro equipment, like this camera that I'm shooting on right now, it can sometimes be a little difficult to tell the difference between 1080p and 4K, especially on YouTube. But when it comes to iPhone footage, you can very much tell the difference between 4K and 1080p, so just stick it on 4K and shoot in that when you're not shooting slow motion. Now, my second tip, and this one is huge, get an app. I personally use ProMovie. I know I've mentioned them in several of my other iPhone videos, still not sponsored. ProMovie, you should sponsor a video in future. Or this video. ProMovie really is a great app, and the reason I personally use it is because you can control white balance, you can do manual focus, very useful for 120p, and you can manually control your bitrate, which is absolutely huge, and we're going to be talking about that next. Overall, ProMovie will just make your video quality much better. You'll have a lot more control over what you can do. You can do the 180-degree shutter rule, you can manually control your white balance. As I said, you can do manual focus pulls. That can always look cinematic. And yeah, overall, getting an app that may cost like $1 or two can really help level up your iPhone video. Next, we're talking bitrate. So you want to shoot in the highest bitrate you possibly can on your iPhone, because when we go to grade it later on, it will fall apart much quicker if you're shooting in too low a bitrate. Bitrate is how many bits of data the video is taking in per second, so megabits per second. This camera's shooting 400 megabits per second, it's taking in 400 Okay, I realized that was unnecessary. The more megabits per second you record, the more data you'll have to work with in post, which generally means you're gonna get a stronger image. Stock, the iPhone only shoots 500 megabits per second in 4K, which is actually really kind of low, but with the ProMovie app, we can shoot in 120 megabits per second, so if you really want to get better results in post, I suggest finding a way to shoot in a higher bitrate. Next, we got everybody's favorite, slow motion. Typically, it's very hard to get cinematic looking slow motion on an iPhone. The autofocus kind of goes a little crazy, the dynamic range takes a significant drop, and to make the 120p on the iPhone usable, you gotta do some serious tweaking. My first tip is manual focus if you can. As I said earlier, this helps massively with the focus pulsing. Focus pulsing just doesn't look cinematic, and that's what we're going for. So now my next tip is to nail your exposure. Because we're stretching out that bitrate even more than it was before, you won't have that much room in post to work with the colors. Don't get me wrong, you're still going to be able to color grade it, but doing luma adjustments is just not going to be doable on 120p footage. If you nail your exposure, then that shouldn't be a problem anyway. Again, and my final tip for slow motion is shoot in the absolute highest bitrate you can. Now again, with the ProMovie app, I can shoot in 120 megabits per second, but that is nothing on the slow motion of the GH5, like I've already said. In 120p, this thing shoots at a monstrous 400 megabits per second. We'll probably have a slow motion sequence in here later. That's why the slow motion on the GH5 looks so much better, despite the fact that they're technically shooting at the same resolution. This also has a much bigger sensor too. Hilarious, I never thought I'd say that about a Micro Four Thirds camera. On to the next tip. So next up is dynamic range. Dynamic range is also another area where most smartphones tend to struggle, mainly due to the small sensor. And to combat this, some people recommend you overexpose and then bring it down to preserve the shadows, but I actually recommend the opposite. I recommend you slightly underexpose, then bring the shadows up, noise reducing if you need to, and doing this you will get a much cleaner image than if you were to do it the other way around. This is purely because phones don't have that good of a highlight roll off. So if I were to do that on a camera like this, then I probably could get away with it because it's got a good highlight roll off, there's a good solid amount of detail in the highlights, but with this it's a small sensor, there's not a great highlight roll off, so underexpose, then bring it back up for the maximum amount of dynamic range. Something other people also suggest is sort of like a fake log profile. Never do this. I'm a big advocate for not shooting log if you don't need to, especially if you're shooting on 8-bit color. I only ever shoot log in 10-bit, because if you shoot in 8-bit, you get a plethora of problems that are just really difficult to deal with. It doesn't give you more dynamic range because it's not a real log gamut. It doesn't make your footage look more cinematic. It just makes it much harder in post, and it will completely ruin your skin tones. So overall, underexpose your image and bring it back up slightly if you can't nail your exposure, and never shoot log on your iPhone. Finally, we have low light. Now, this is actually one of my favorite things to shoot. I really love going out at night and just filming some incredible footage. There's just something special about shooting in low light. I really love it. But on something like this, it's kind of difficult. This is again due to the small sensor. It's kind of difficult to get good low light on phones. But what I suggest doing is actually lean into that darkness. If you're trying to expose something dark as if it were a lit up object, so you tap on it, you drag up your exposure, that will look horrendous. These sensors aren't made to be doing that. They're not designed for that type of heavy lifting. But if you lean into the darkness, so you expose for the light, then it can look really cool. I mean, everybody likes a bit of street light bokeh, and you can definitely get away with using your iPhone for some street light bokeh, just not extreme shooting in low light. So you're trying to film the northern lights, doing it on something like this would be practically impossible. And I know it's been said a million times, but shooting in good light really is the key to making your footage look easily cinematic. I suggest either shooting on an overcast day, in the shadows, or using some artificial light. Like for instance, I'm currently using this Godox SL60W. I turn that off and there we go. That's what it looks like. So yeah, tips for low light: lean into the darkness, don't expose for the shadows when you're shooting in low light, and shoot in good light if you can. Okay, I think we've been talking long enough. Let's take the iPhone and go shoot. And also this camera, because I need this to document. Okay, so now moving on to post-production, this is where we're going to be taking our iPhone footage truly to the next level. Okay, so I'm working in Premiere, but it doesn't really matter what you're working in as long as it's got color grading options. And so to start, we're going to head over to the color tab. Now, this is a gorgeous sunset that happened a couple of weeks back. Okay, so as we can see, this is a nighttime shot. Specifically, well, it's a sunset shot. So what are we going to do with the shadows? We're not going to boost them because there's just going to be way too much noise. I'm not clicking on the right clip. We're not going to boost the shadows because I'm going to show you what's going to happen. Hopefully YouTube doesn't destroy it. See all this crazy noise in the shadows? No, what we're going to do is we're going to lean into that darkness. So we're going to drag it down, then we're going to go into the creative and add some faded film. And I mean, look at that. That already looks amazing. It's got like a vintage look to it, but most importantly, that noise is gone from the shadows. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a LUT. We're going to use this emerald LUT. I got it from Matti Hapoya's Cine LUTs 2-pack. Great LUT pack, by the way. Let's just add this on. And that looks ridiculous. We're going to drag it down to about, I'd say 50%. I think that looks really nice. It really brings out the oranges in that gorgeous sunset. Doesn't ruin the image with noise. We are going to desaturate it slightly. It's a little too saturated for my tastes. And there we go. Look at how good that looks. And that barely took me any time whatsoever. If I wasn't recording, I could probably get this done in like 10 seconds. Seriously, color grading your footage can make a world of difference. Now, next we have another low light shot. So again, if we drag up those shadows, that's just gonna look disgusting. But because we leaned into that darkness, we exposed for the highlights, we can use this to our advantage and we can create a really cool looking dark shot. So we're gonna drag those shadows down, and we're going to drag the highlights up to have like a really nice backlit look to this Deadpool figure. This time we're not going to add any faded film, and we're actually going to add one of the most used and actually probably one of my favorite LUTs. This is the M31 LUT. And bam, look at that. It's added a nice highlight roll off. The shadows have a really cool looking teal tint to them. And yeah, honestly, I'd say this is done. I'm going to sharpen this one a little bit because I wasn't using the app. And there we go. That is done. So for the next tip, we have this shot. Now, this is actually accidentally in slow motion. So again, we got to be really kind of careful with this. It's also got skin tones in, so this is going to be kind of hard to color grade. First of all, we're going to open our Lumetri scopes, and you don't really need to pay attention to any of this. These two are all you need. So this is the Luma Parade. Now, this is what we're going to use to set the shadows. Okay, so we're going to drag the shadows down, and we're going to set those till they sit on almost 0. We don't want to crush them too much. This is what this is for. You can drag that down and those will go crazy negative. It doesn't look all that good. I'm not really a fan of the crushed black look, but we are going to drag that saturation down a bit because again, we're going to be using a very saturated LUT. This time we're going to go for a stock Premiere LUT. We're going to use the Fuji Eterna 250D. This is one of my favorite LUTs. One of the reasons I like this LUT so much is it's kind of forgiving on skin tones, but they do still look a little bit warm. We can verify this using the vector scope. And we're just going to drag that down just a little bit. We don't want them crazy cold. And we do want them a little bit warm, but we don't want them that warm. So we're going to drag it down by about 9 points. And then we're going to add a little bit of faded film again. Okay. There we go. See, look at how much of a difference that's made. It hasn't skewed the skin tones. And yeah, overall, I think this is a really good looking color grade. So this shot is making use of that slightly underexposed tip. We can see the sky isn't blown out, but this is slightly underexposed. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag the shadows up just a little bit till it looks about neutral. Then we're actually going to go into the curves and then add the contrast back in the mid-tones. So instead of us losing data in the highlights or the shadows, we can actually just bring that same level of contrast if we make the adjustment in the mid-tones. Gonna create a highlight roll-off again, and this is looking very desaturated, so we're gonna add a little bit of saturation. We don't want to add too much because we're still gonna use a LUT on this thing. You know what? I think we'll use this M31 LUT again. Oh, look at that. That just looks so good. Look at how blue the sky is. This LUT also makes the greens just look so good, but it does look a little bit too intense. The iPhone can't really handle it, especially as, again, I accidentally shot this in slow motion. In 4K, it probably could handle it, but because this is a 1080p slow motion clip by accident, we're just going to drag it down a little. Now we're going to bring that back with some stock saturation, and there we go. Honestly, through color grading, it's so easy to make your footage look good. Okay, so edit done. Hope you guys found these tips helpful. Feel free to tag me on either Twitter or Instagram on anything you use these tips in. Update on my personal iPhone. It is coming. It did try to get delivered today, but I wasn't in, so I missed the delivery. I think it's coming tomorrow. Okay, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. I'm done, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stuff in my double cup, roll a blunt, get high as fuck, man, yo, bitch, she on my nuts, y'all want the shit that we finna bust, y'all mad at me, y'all shoot at me, y'all stab at me, I'm lonely and I'm unhappy, I'm feeling sick cause I'm so sad.